But first, police in Chester believe they have found the body of a woman who was reported missing last month. 33-year-old Courtney Staples has not been seen since July 11th. Last night, boaters found a car in the Delaware River with a body inside. The car does match the description of the vehicle that was driven by Staples. Action News reporter Taronda Thomas is live for us now from the Chester Police Department with the very latest on what we're hearing.
It is just after 1 in the morning on a quiet residential street in Aubrey, Texas, in a neighborhood called Savannah, where the houses are new and the lawns are still thin from recent construction. A patrol car turns onto Forsyth Drive. The porch light is on. The front door of the house is standing open, not forced, not broken, just ajar, as if someone had meant to close it and never got the chance. Inside, officers with the Elm Ridge Police Department will find 2 people dead, and in another room, an infant, unharmed, alone with the silence. What happened in that house in the hours before officers arrived is, in the strictest legal sense, already solved. But the story of how it happened, the story of 2 lives that ended in the same room within moments of each other, is one that investigators and the people who loved Stephanie Ingram are still trying to understand. Stephanie Dominique Ingram was 30 years old. She lived in Aubrey, a fast-growing town in Denton County that has, in recent years, become one of the many new suburbs absorbing families moving north out of Dallas and Fort Worth. Beyond her name, her age, and the fact that she was a mother, the public record of Stephanie's life is limited. No detailed biography, employer, or personal history has been released by authorities or reported by local media. What is documented is this. In the early morning hours of August 20th, 2023, Stephanie was killed inside her own home. Her death would be classified by the Tarrant County Medical Examiner's Office as a homicide caused by gunshot wounds to the head and neck. The man responsible was 32-year-old Anthony Jontrell Thornton. Police describe him as Stephanie's boyfriend. The 2 were in a dating relationship at the time of her death. As with Stephanie, little about Thornton's background has been made public. There is no known criminal history disclosed in connection with this case, no restraining order on record, no prior police calls to the home that investigators have pointed to. Whatever tension, conflict, or crisis unfolded between them in the time leading up to that night remains, as of now, undocumented, a private history that ended with both of them dead and no one left to explain how it got there. What is known is the timeline of that final night. Sometime in the early hours of August 20th, officers were called to the home on Forsyth Drive. When they arrived at approximately 1:19 in the morning, they found both Stephanie and Anthony deceased inside the residence. The front door was open. There was no standoff, no chase, no public threat requiring evacuation or alert. By the time law enforcement reached the house, it was already over. Investigators would later determine, through physical evidence and the findings of the medical examiner, what had happened inside those walls. Thornton had shot Stephanie and then turned the gun on himself. Her manner of death was ruled a homicide. His was ruled a suicide. Same house, officers found an infant. The child was unharmed, beyond that single critical fact that a baby survived a night that claimed 2 adult lives in the same room. The public record offers no further detail about the child's identity, age, or what became of them afterward. It is one of the case's most haunting elements precisely because so little is known. An infant who was present for a tragedy they will likely never remember, but whose life was nonetheless permanently shaped by it. There was no drawn-out manhunt in this case, no forensic mystery to unravel in the way true crime cases often unfold. Because the person responsible for Stephanie's death did not survive the night, there would be no arrest, no interrogation room, no trial, no jury weighing evidence, no sentencing hearing where a judge might speak on behalf of the court and the victim's family. The investigation that did take place was smaller in scope, but no less serious, confirming what had happened, establishing the manner and cause of death for both parties, and determining, to the satisfaction of investigators, that this was, in their words, an isolated domestic incident between 2 individuals in a dating relationship. Elm Ridge Police stated publicly that there was no indication of an ongoing threat to the public. For the community around Forsyth Drive, that distinction mattered. This was not a stranger who might return, not a danger loose in the neighborhood. It was something that happened between 2 people, behind a closed door that, by the time help arrived, had already been left open. That framing an isolated domestic incident is precise in a legal and procedural sense. It tells us what the case was not a home invasion, not a robbery gone wrong, not a random act of violence against strangers, but it also tells us very little about what the case actually was. Behind that clinical phrase sits a much harder and more familiar question, one that echoes through domestic violence cases across the country every year. How does a relationship between two people reach a point where one of them takes the other's life, and then their own? It's a question investigators aren't required to answer once a case is closed by the deaths of both parties involved. There is no defendant left to charge, so there is no courtroom where that history gets aired, cross-examined, and placed on the public record. In cases like this one, the deepest truths of what led to the violence often die with the people who lived them. What's left instead is the aftermath, quieter, and in many ways harder to see. A family that had someone in it named Stephanie no longer does. An infant who was in that house that night will grow up shaped by an absence they had no way of understanding at the time. A neighborhood in a town still building itself out of open fields now carries one more address people remember for the wrong reason. None of that made headlines with the same urgency as the initial report. There was no follow-up story about a trial because there was no trial, no sentencing date to mark on a calendar. Cases like this one tend to fade from public attention quickly, not because they matter less, but because the legal system has nothing left to process. The file closes almost as soon as it opens. Domestic violence homicides that end this way, with the person responsible not surviving to face prosecution, represent a significant and often under-examined category within intimate partner violence in the United States. They deny survivors and communities the chance for a public reckoning. No verdict is delivered, no motive is ever formally established in court, no opportunity exists for the kind of accountability that a trial, however imperfect, can sometimes provide. What remains is largely what law enforcement chooses or is able to release, and in Stephanie Ingram's case, that record is sparse. We know when, we know where, we know in clinical terms how, we do not know why, and absent new information coming forward from people who knew Stephanie and Anthony, we may never know. It would be easy, faced with that gap, to fill it in, to imagine an argument, a breaking point, a pattern of warning signs that led inevitably to this outcome. But doing so would mean inventing a story neither Stephanie nor Anthony are here to confirm or deny. What can be said, honestly and without speculation, is only what the record supports. Two adults in a relationship, a home in a new Texas suburb, a night that ended with one of them dead by the other's hand, and a life taken in turn by its own hand shortly after. An infant left alive in the house. A police department that closed its investigation, having found no further threat to the public. And a family, largely unnamed and unheard from publicly, left to carry forward a story that the official record leaves unfinished. Stephanie Dominique Ingram was 30 years old when she died. That single fact, stated plainly, is often the truest thing that can be said about cases like hers, because everything else, everything that might explain how her life ended the way it did, remains locked inside a night and a house and a relationship that only two people ever fully understood. One of them is gone, the other is gone too. What's left is a door that was found open, a child who survived, and a question that, for now, has no answer anyone is left alive to give.